I found my mom's old watch while I was getting ready to sell the house my dad might end up dying alone in. I returned to the old house after 10 years of silence, carrying 2 suitcases and a cold decision to sell it. The 3-bedroom wooden house nestled deep in the Oregon pines looked just as still as the day I left, but the silence inside me, that had long since rotted. I didn't come back for my father, not for the memories, certainly not out of longing. I came back for my mother, or more precisely, for the death she left behind, unfinished and untouched. I wanted to end it, once and for all. I found her old watch tucked beneath a velvet cloth in the drawer of her old bedroom, right next to the room my father still lived in. It wasn't exactly hidden, but it wasn't somewhere anyone would casually reach for either. The metal case had faded, the leather strap was brittle and broken, and the glass face was cruelly fogged. The hour hand was frozen at 10:08. No one ever told me what time she died, but my heart skipped a beat when I saw those numbers. I sat on the floor, holding the watch in my hands, and it felt like holding warm ashes. Part of me wanted to throw it away, like every memory that once spilled through this house. But I couldn't, not out of emotion or sentiment. Curiosity. Why had it stopped exactly then? Why was it still here, untouched? I didn't enter my father's room. We hadn't really spoken since the accident. The day Mom died, he shut the door, both literally and metaphorically. I left home 2 weeks after the funeral. No goodbyes, no promises to return. At the small town library where I worked, I never mentioned my father. If anyone asked, I told them he died with her. And maybe, in some way, he did. The dead watch was like a mummy. Its shape intact, its inside hollow. I brought it to a watch repair shop in Salem, about 30 miles from the house. The shop owner was an Asian man in his 60s, with silver hair and a solemn face. He examined the watch under a magnifier, saying nothing for nearly 5 minutes. Then he placed it down and looked at me, not as if he'd read the watch, but as if he'd read me. "It's not broken," he said. "It stopped on its own." I didn't ask what he meant, not because I understood, but because I was afraid I might. I left the watch and drove back to my father's house. He wasn't in the living room. The house felt hollow, like he too had slowly disappeared from every space she had once filled. I went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, 3 cartons of expired milk and a block of moldy cheese. On the table, a cup of coffee left untouched, a faint lip print on the rim. I couldn't tell if it was from today or from days ago. 3 weeks later, I picked up the watch. It had been cleaned, polished, but the hands were still frozen at 10:08. I didn't change anything, the repairman said, because I thought it should stay that way. I thanked him and drove back in silence. The watch sat on my lap like a relic, neither alive nor dead, just waiting to be understood. I placed it on the old desk in my childhood room, beside a faded photograph. In the picture, me, Mom, and Dad. I must have been 8, sitting on his shoulders, holding a paper lantern in the air. Mom stood beside us, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, as if, just maybe, something in that photo had once been real. But I don't remember that day. I don't remember my father ever laughing. That night, I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard my father's footsteps, slow, dragging, like someone lost in his own home. I didn't leave my room. But the next morning, the watch was gone from the desk. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. Just cold. My father had never touched a single thing of hers since she died, but he took the watch. I searched the whole house. Nothing. Then I went into his room for the first time in 10 years. It was the same as always, clean, detached, each item holding its own breath. On his nightstand was a leather notebook, left open in the middle, one line written on the page. 10:08. You still haven't forgiven me, have you? I backed out of the room, head buzzing. Things that were never spoken floated up like corpses after a flood. I started to understand why the watch stopped at that precise moment. Not because it had witnessed her death, but because it had imprisoned time. Someone, maybe my mother, maybe my father, had frozen the clock the moment silence became forever. I didn't leave again. I stopped, like that watch, waiting to be wound back, not to return to the past, but to begin something new. Just not today, and not with a happy ending. I held the watch in my hand for 3 days without opening it. It sat still like a forgotten piece of time, as if just turning the crown slightly would bring all the pain rushing back, uninvited. I placed it on the desk in my old bedroom, the one still bearing faint fingerprint of childhood, a stack of unpacked books, and the floral curtains Mom once picked. Outside, the rain fell steadily, not hard enough to be a storm, but persistent enough to strip the years off the cracked ceiling. I could hear each drop seeping through the walls like the breath of an aging house, or maybe of my father himself. That night at dinner, I saw him sitting at the kitchen table. The overhead light was brighter than usual, casting a harsh orange glow that exposed every crease on his forehead. There was no food, just an old bottle of whiskey and an empty glass. I didn't walk in. I stood at the doorway, exactly 3 steps away from him. A whole lifetime fit into those 3 steps, and I had never once managed to cross them. The watch still lay on my desk, but in that moment I realized it wasn't stuck at 10:08. I was the one who was stuck. I don't remember what I said to start, or if I said anything at all. I only remember sitting down, not directly across from him, but off to the side, just like the way Mom used to place my chair between them, hoping I could be a bridge. He poured me a drink without asking. I drank without refusing. The old whiskey hit like a slap, bitter and warm. I hadn't had alcohol since Mom died, but that night, I let it slide down my throat like an old bone I'd never learned to swallow. My father didn't look at me when he began to speak. His voice was flat, dry, like he was reading a report he'd edited many times. He talked about the last time he saw her, that morning, when she walked out the door wearing her brown coat, hair pulled back in a rush, and turned to say something he couldn't remember. Probably goodbye, he said, but all I could think about was that she left the hallway light on. I didn't know what I felt. Pity? Anger? Maybe both. Maybe nothing at all. He told me they had fought that morning. Something old, always something old. Mom wanted him to come to my piano recital at school. He said he couldn't skip his shift. She didn't argue. She just left, quietly, like she always did. But that time, he said, she didn't come back. And for the first time, I saw his eyes turn red. Not wet, just red, like the tears had dried long ago, leaving only the stain. I listened, but his words passed through a kind of glass in my mind. I didn't want to forgive, but I couldn't turn away either. Something in the way he spoke made me feel close, not as father and son, but as 2 men, both of whom had lost the same woman, just in different ways. I thought of the watch, and I knew I had to open it. The next morning, I went into my room, closed the door, and pulled the curtains. The soft light fell over everything, making the room feel like an old dream. I picked up the watch, opened the back. Everything inside was intact, but tucked between the gears was a small folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, a neat square written in blue ink, in a handwriting so familiar it hurt. Mom's. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. But I want you to know, it didn't end at 10:08. That's when it began. I couldn't breathe, couldn't cry, just felt a hot wave rise in my throat. Mom never wrote me letters. She always spoke, always touched my shoulder when she did. She wasn't the kind of person who used written words. But she left this, not for him, for me. I grabbed the watch and ran downstairs. My father was still sitting there, eyes distant like he no longer lived in this house. I placed the watch on the table. He looked at it, then at me. I slid the note toward him. He didn't rush to open it, just rested his hand on the face of the watch, as if holding the last heartbeat of the past. "She knew," I said. "She knew everything, and she forgave you in her own way." My father read the note, folded it, and slipped it into the pocket of his shirt. He didn't say a word, but he stood up for the first time since I returned. He opened the cabinet and took out a long wooden box, placed it on the table. "They're copies of your piano performances," he said. "Your mom recorded them. I never had the courage to listen, but maybe now we can listen together." I opened the box. Old cassette tapes, neatly labeled in her handwriting. First recital, 2005, Winter Variations, Rainy Day Sonata. I never knew she recorded them. I never knew he kept them. I never knew that for all those years, he lived in this house like a self-imposed ghost, not out of apathy, but because he was afraid to go on without her. That night, we listened to the tapes together. The sound was warped, aged, but it was still my piano, still the music of a child who hadn't yet known pain, who had no idea that one day he'd give anything just to hear himself play again. My father kept his eyes closed through the first tape. When the music ended, he opened them and said softly, "She's still here." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure if it was true, but I believed it. Because for the first time in my life, this house didn't feel so unbearably silent. I don't remember how many recordings we listened to that night. All I know is that each piece of music felt like it was peeling off a thick layer of dust from my mind, and maybe from his, too. When Winter Variations played, the one where I mess up in the middle, I let out a small laugh. The sound startled us both. I turned to look at him and saw the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. Fragile, faint, but real. I was no longer the child who resented his father's coldness, and no longer the silent man carrying the weight of blame. In that moment, I was just a son, sitting beside a father who had grown old from all the things he'd never said. And my father, he wasn't the distant man from my memories anymore. He was human, flawed, yes, but also deeply wounded. That night, when I returned to my room, the watch was back on the desk. But this time, it wasn't face down. It was upright, staring at the ceiling, as if waiting for a hand to turn the crown. I sat down and stared at it for a long time. Then, for the first time in over 10 years, I reached out and gently twisted it. The ticking hand made a soft sound, like a breath drawn after too long a sleep. I set it to 10:08, then turned it just a little more. 10:09, 10:10. The minute hand started to move slowly, as if time had agreed to be awakened, not to rewind, but to continue. There was no explosion inside me, no flood of emotions, just a quiet, unfamiliar softness, like something had clicked into place, silently, but securely. The next morning, I found my father sitting on the porch with the same coffee cup in hand, but his eyes were no longer distant. In his hands, an old photo, the one where I'm on his shoulders, Mom standing beside us. I sat next to him, said nothing. He handed me the photo, pointed to her, then to me. "You're alike," he said, "both too strong to let anyone close." I didn't argue, because I understood. I had lived my whole youth as if I was the only one who lost something. I never asked him how much it hurt, what he lost, what he had left. I wore my pain like a medal, using it to shield myself from tenderness. But now I realized, some pain doesn't need to be spoken. It only needs to be acknowledged. And some silences aren't voids. They're unsaid apologies. That day, we cleaned out the attic together, the place where Mom used to keep old boxes, embroidered handkerchiefs, her cooking journals, and cassette tapes of her old lectures. She once taught French at the town school. I listened to her voice in one of the recordings, warm and rounded, and suddenly remembered the evening she used to teach me how to pronounce that long French R. My father stood beside me, saying nothing, just placing his hand gently on my shoulder. It was so light, I almost didn't notice it, but I knew, in that touch, he had said all he could. That afternoon, I called work and asked for an extra week off. I didn't have a clear reason. I just said, I need to stay. There's something I haven't done yet. I wasn't staying to relive the past. I was staying to help the man who once was my father relearn how to live, and to help myself relearn how to love, without judgment. We worked together to restore the old piano in the living room, the one I thought I'd never touch again. The keys were uneven, the tuning was off, but I played anyway, not to perform, but to listen to myself, and to him, sitting quietly behind me, nodding every now and then, as if speaking a language only we understood. One early morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. I opened my door and saw my father standing at the back door, wearing a heavy coat, the watch in his hand. He turned when he saw me, said nothing, just handed me the watch. And I understood he didn't need to hold it anymore. It no longer belonged to either of us alone. It belonged to us, to the time we still had, not the time we lost. I brought it back to my room, placed it on the desk. The hands were still moving, slowly, steadily. I sat by the window. Morning sunlight crept through the leaves, soft streaks of gold, nothing harsh, just enough to say the day has begun. It was a morning like any other, but something inside me had changed. I no longer needed to forgive my father, and I no longer needed him to forgive me. We had stayed silent for too long, and that silence had killed something human in each of us. But not anymore. Now there was music, the clink of a spoon against a ceramic cup, footsteps on wooden floors, and the steady tick of a clock, not marking the time of death, but gently announcing, life goes on. Time doesn't rewind, but if we're brave enough to step into the room we once left empty in our hearts, we can help it move forward, not from where it stopped, but from the moment we finally chose to face it without turning away. I didn't leave right after that. I stayed for another month, longer than anyone would have expected. I could stay in the place that used to be home. No one rushed me. There was no job in the city urgently waiting. No relationship that needed nurturing beyond the one I was trying to rebuild with myself. And for the first time, I didn't feel like time was something I had to chase. It simply became a dimension, and I was living inside it unhurried. My father started to laugh more. Small laughs, mostly when he caught me spilling water, or when the piano went off key and I still played the piece through. One day, he brought out an old leather notebook. Said it was where Mom had written down funny things I'd said as a kid. I flipped through the pages and found lines I'd long forgotten. You once said, he read aloud, "If someone dies, can they send emails from heaven?" He looked at me and laughed, but I noticed a shimmer in his eyes. Maybe he was thinking, if there were emails from heaven, what would Mom have written? I started writing again. Not reports, not apologies, not confessions. Just writing for myself. About Mom, about Dad, about the things I once thought were permanent, but turned out to be nothing more than the shell of an unnamed fear. I wrote as if each word could stitch a part of me back together, and every time I set the pen down, I felt a little lighter, not because I'd forgiven anyone, but because I'd stopped needing to be right. One afternoon, while clearing out the backyard, Dad came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. I took one, sipped it, looked up at him. "I'm heading back to the city next week," I said. He nodded, didn't try to stop me, didn't say good luck, just nodded. But I knew, in that simple gesture, he had said everything he couldn't with words, and I cherished that more than any embrace. Before leaving, I stepped into Mom's room one last time. It was still the same. Neat, soft with the faint scent of lavender. I placed the watch back on the vanity, right where I'd found it. It was still ticking. The minute hand hovered between two numbers, as if hesitating between the past and the future. I didn't take it with me. It no longer marked a dead moment, but a lived one, and it belonged here, in this house where time had once stopped, and now moved again. I said goodbye to my father on the porch. No tears, just a look that lingered one extra second, as if he wanted to remember my face without resentment. I got in the car, drove slowly through the winding road lined with pine trees. The landscape was still the same, peaceful, green, endless, but I knew I wasn't the same man who once ran away from it. I was someone who had come back, faced it, lived it. The city welcomed me with lights and noise. I returned to my old apartment, opened the door, and stepped into the familiar emptiness. Everything was as I'd left it. The books, the coffee machine, the messy shelves. But I was different, and that was enough to make everything in that room feel new. I took a small picture frame, slipped in the photo of the three of us, Dad, Mom, and me, placed it on the desk, not for decoration, but as a reminder. I could finally look at a memory without turning away. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter from my father, the same sturdy, square handwriting. "I'm learning how to bake," he wrote. "First time didn't burn." I laughed. At the end, there was one line: "If you want, come home for the holidays." No pressure, no expectation, just an invitation. But something inside me clicked, like a switch I hadn't touched in years. I nodded, though no one saw, then sat down and wrote back. "I'll come home, and this time I'm bringing the piano." I wanted him to hear the music again, not through an old cassette, but from the very fingers that had once wandered lost in regret. And this time, I wouldn't be playing for anyone else, but the man who, for years, had kept every recording in silence. My mom's old watch isn't just a keepsake. It's a symbol of time once frozen, alongside wounds left unhealed, relationships thought beyond repair, and words that were never spoken. But sometimes, all it takes is a single moment of courage, to open, to face, to truly listen, and everything can start moving again, not from where it ended, but from the moment you're finally ready to begin. If you've ever had a watch like that in your life, a person, a memory, or something unresolved, feel free to share your story or your feelings in the comments below. We read every word. We listen, and we're honored to walk with you on your healing journey. Thank you for watching to the end. If this story meant something to you, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might also need a moment to reconnect with the past. We'll see you in the next video, where every story is a small key to a much bigger door within ourselves. Thank you for being here.